Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, and so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello, and welcome to Fired Up, the startup marketing podcast, where we explore the trends and provide tips about building brand and driving demand for your startup. My name is Morgan McClintock, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Ian Lipner. Hi, Ian. How are you?
Good, Morgan. Fired up to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about fractional CMOs. What is a fractional CMO? What kind of companies use them? How does one become one? Could I become a fractional CMO? To help figure this out, we'll be joined by Alison Murdock. She's a growth-focused marketing executive and an entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience building and scaling global marketing teams in Silicon Valley and Europe. She was the first VP of marketing at 6 Sense. She went to Social Course after that, now known as First Up. And now she's at Trusted CMO, which offers startup and growth stage companies and teams the marketing resources, experience, and talent to make a greater impact on their businesses. Alison, thanks for joining Fired Up.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. I want to start with, we like to start with something topical. And so just perusing Harvard Business Review, as you do, they've got a recent survey actually by Gartner. Gartner every year does a CMO survey, and about 400 companies in North America and Europe, largely bigger companies. But unsurprisingly, they talk about spend, and spend is down from the pre-COVID peaks. You know, it's about 9.5% of revenues in 2022, and it's gone down a little bit to just over 9 in 23. So still, good marking point there. Here's some stats, though, and I want to see what you think about this. More than 70% of the respondents said that their enterprise lacks sufficient budget to successfully deliver the marketing strategy. So that's a concern. 75% say that their enterprise is asking them to do more with less, but 86% say that they're under pressure to make significant changes in how marketing works to achieve sustainable results. So, this is enterprises, but are we seeing that in startups? What do you think?
Yeah, we definitely are seeing it in startups as well. And I think, I work with 3 different kinds of startups: the very early stage, the sort of small team growth stage, and then the more established companies that are still, compared to a Microsoft, so maybe would be considered a startup, or at least startup size. This is all pretty true for them. But I will qualify this with an opportunity for every stage of company to look at what they're doing in marketing and make sure that whatever they're doing, it's contributing to pipeline and eventually to revenue. So remember, prior to, even during the pandemic, we overhired people. We bought a lot of technology. We were, all over the country trying to coordinate a strategy. I would say if Gartner had said, how many of you had to rethink your strategy, not because you were lacking customers, but because it was generally inefficient, 85% would be, oh yeah, we have that problem. So I think we're seeing a little bit of that. And also some response to fear about, can we keep acquiring customers at the pace that we used to? Are people still spending money? We know that their budgets are sort of down across the board. So the opportunity really is for companies to become more efficient. So one of the clients I work with, she new CMO, she just came in and she said, this team is lacking urgency, a sense of urgency. And half of them don't even feel like their job is pipeline. So she had a severe talking to pretty much, but we were supporting her saying, look, everybody needs to feel that pipeline is, whether they're is part of their job, whether they're writing blog posts or social posts or, sending out emails or doing marketing ops, everyone should be connected to pipeline. So when we're saying do more with less, that's part of the conversation. Be more efficient and be connected to actual outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. In this report, they do say that for one of the first times that the spend on MarTech, the technology, which has normally just been all, going up and up and up, is actually people are starting to look at that spend and say, hey, we got too much investment here. We got enough systems, and actually to get the systems that you've got working together. And we certainly see that. I want to just start out. We're going to talk about fractional CMOs. So just to set the scene a little bit, perhaps you could just explain to us, what is a fractional CMO? What do they do? Why would a startup want a fractional CMO?
Fractional really means, just at its core, somebody who's holding the role, whether it's a CFO, CTO, CMO, holding a part-time role as a leader at a company. When I started Trusted CMO, so I founded this company in 2020, February, and then the pandemic, but hey, it didn't affect me. People still have to market. But I didn't really think about being a fractional CMO. I actually was solving a different problem, which was people just really didn't have anything in marketing. They were starting from zero. They didn't understand it. I think I only know of one company where the CEO was a CMO. I mean, it's just not that common. And I sort of started there saying, well, we can help you. We can act as your sort of outsourced team. Now the economy has changed recently, and the opportunities for fractional CMOs have certainly increased. So a fractional CMO, what it is largely depends on what the company needs. One instance that's quite common is that a CMO will have departed a company. They will have left, been fired, quit, whatever it is. And the company still needs a marketing leader to lead the team and to direct the strategy. So many fractional CMOs will come in for a time to do that. The time, it depends. It can be 3 months because we think we're going to hire someone in 3 months. It can be a year. One client I'm working with, it's probably going to be over a year. We've established quite a rapport with them, and I don't know that they'll ever hire a full-time CMO at this point. For me personally, the remit is so many things. Like it can be a budget oversight, it could be team management, it could be a special project. And what I find is depending on the scope, I often partner with other fractional CMOs, other people with maybe a slightly different background to support the full remit that these companies might have. And depending on what their growth objectives are, it really can vary.
How does an entrepreneur decide when to bring in a fractional CMO?
There is a trigger. And again, like I work with companies that are seed stage all the way to, Series D. The trigger is often pressure from the board, pressure from the sales team to say, look, we don't have any materials, or we don't really have a strategy, or we're not getting enough leads, or at the earliest stages, okay, you've got product market fit, founder's been selling, it's time to institutionalize this and put some process around it. So that's usually the trigger. Sometimes it is, like I said, a sudden departure of the leader, and the company is desperately looking for someone to fill the role because that person was, in that case, they might have quit. And they were like, oh no, now what are we going to do? We have 20 people that need to report to somebody.
You're the fractional CMO. So you come in and you're working part-time for one company. How many companies would a fractional CMO be dividing their attention across at any one time? Like how much time might a startup actually get? This is a full-time job. Mm-hmm. But you're only giving it part-time. How does that really work?
Yeah. So, that's what's really different about my approach to fractional CMO versus a lot of others. And I'm on a Slack channel, actually, all about fractional CMOs. And, a lot of that conversation is, how do I write a contract? And I'm like, look, I've been doing this already for 4 years. And how do we divide our time? It really depends on what the remit is. But that's why I often partner with someone else that if, for example, they need a marketing capacity across the board, product marketing, comms, content, demand gen, then I work with somebody else. I have 2 or 3 different partners I work with who provide those other services. And I'll focus on the ones that, are best suited for me. So that one, I'm not at full capacity with that company, but also I can focus on the things that are really going to move the needle for this company. Otherwise, when we're talking a smaller company, they don't need marketing all the time. They need very specific things. The way that Trusted CMO is built is that I'm sort of the front person, but I have a sort of a syndicated group of partners much like, maybe you'll be one of them too, Morgan, at some point, that, help us execute a project and a strategy that this company is putting into place. So it allows us to scale. And it's also really beneficial for the companies themselves because they don't need a lot sometimes at the beginning. They just need a little bit, and then they'll change and increase their needs over time. And some of these companies we've been working with for 2 or 3 years as just sort of their outsourced team. And they're like, hey, we need to redo our website. Look, we'll find somebody. So that's how it worked. And I think it's great because it allows me to be entrepreneurial, allows them to be entrepreneurial, and everybody sort of gets what they need at the end of the day.
You talked about moving the needle. And so let's talk about what success looks like and how you know when your engagement is working and when it's a great relationship.
It depends on what the company's objectives are, but let's assume that everybody wants to make money, right? We spend a lot of time with a company at the beginning, and it's almost always with the CEO at the early stages, understanding their go-to-market, where they are, how they think they're going to sell, their strategy. And, we do a fair amount of counsel. I've had one client that came to me and said, look, we want to, sell into the United States, and these are our competitors. And they had such a clear idea. And I said, actually, I don't think that's right. Like, here's some other research. And they were like, oh my gosh. So we completely changed the strategy. So a little bit of consultation there. And then we set objectives together, just as if I were in-house. And then if we're meeting them, then we say we're winning. If something's not working, then we readjust. So it's very much a collaborative process. I think the main point, when you're a fractional CMO or you're considering that, or even looking for clients, you really want a client that believes that marketing can help them, that wants marketing. I'm sure like Morgan probably, it's we just need some PR. Like, it doesn't work that way. You have to understand what it is. You have to understand that marketing is way more than t-shirts and trade shirts. Sure, that's part of it. But it's strategy that often requires technology or a systematic approach or people to do certain things they're not used to doing and a level of training. And it's a complex field.
For sure. So you mentioned some KPIs there and, pipeline right at the beginning of this. Can you give us some examples of the kinds of KPIs the startup should be thinking about when they're hiring a fractional CMO? Is it literally, hey, we need this many MQLs that go to SQL? Like, is it like that? Like, what kind of metrics should the startup be signing up a CMO for?
If they knew what an MQL was at the early stages, that would make my job easier. But typically they don't. I mean, a lot of it is dictated by, at some early stage, their business plan. How many customers do we need to acquire? What areas, what is the level of awareness we need to drive in order to get in front of those customers? So, and actually it's best in some ways if they think about this, saying, look, here's a list of 100 that we want to win. I said, great, that's account-based marketing 101. Yeah. You've got that. But then explaining to them sort of how a funnel works in order to get to those people and understanding business buying. So it's probably not just the CFO who decides, but it's probably maybe a CTO and someone else that you have to woo and educate. And it's a process. One of the conversations, we have around KPIs is really not only the quantity of companies and the ones you want to win, but like the amount of money that you need to have in your pipeline. And what does that even look like? And how do things become pipeline that you need to consider? And, the simplest math is the best, which is, okay, if you need to make $1 million, you need to have 3 million in pipeline. How do you develop pipeline? You have top of funnel, you have nurturing to get them appropriately keyed up for sales, and then sales needs to close. Whether that's you or a AE, that's where we start. And so I think the KPIs for early stage companies are often, pipeline, specific number of customers, types of customers, but then there's the awareness component. So they can't sell well if they can't get a door opened. So we work to do that at the same time. And, that's a lot of building thought leadership to some degree, repeatable content, social, all of the things that some of the differentiation they need to do, which sort of rolls into product marketing, but that fits into the messaging and positioning. And that sets them up pretty well. And in those cases with awareness, it's this, again, simple math, best math. If you're at 500 followers on LinkedIn. Let's try to get to 1,000 in a certain amount of time. And usually just some hard numbers help anchor them and saying, oh, we're doing better than expected. I'm like, good. Set the bar low.
So in terms of the KPIs that you need to manage performance, that's one level of planning. But what about that, looking across that team? You said sometimes a fractional CMO might remain in place for a long time, but other times I'm sure there's sort of a graduation or a progression that an entire marketing department, like who gets onto the internal team first? Like how does that usually play out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot. And I might answer it this way, which is when you're starting out, or even if you come into an existing team, I believe there are three sort of core positions that need to be in place for B2B marketing. And that is a demand gen revenue marketer. So someone who's very connected to pipeline and in charge of all the channels that contribute to pipeline, a content/comms person. So someone who can write well, publish things, amplify, and then a product marketer. That is the person who is looking at competitive set, writes a lot of the product messaging, enables sales. This is what I would call the power trio. And under them, there might be other people and so forth, but really that is the core team. And so a lot of times when we come in as fractional CMOs, one of those positions is missing, or they need to rehire, or there's more junior people in here who kind of I want to do integrated campaign planning. It's like, well, you first need to have a campaign and some of those channels activated. So one of the things, going back to the earlier question you asked about budget impact, I had a client who effectively killed most of the channels, meaning they stopped doing trade shows. They reduced paid spend. They stopped writing content because they stopped sending out a newsletter. They just stopped doing a lot of stuff. And then they were shocked that 6 months later, they had no top of funnel. And I said, well, where do you think top of funnel comes from? So had to kind of do a whole clean slate approach and rehire and rejigger product, every single one of those roles, actually. Every one I just mentioned, there was a rehire, a readjust, because essentially you had a team for 9 months who really wasn't doing much. They were just doing random acts of marketing and it wasn't moving the needle. So I think that's one of the things you see, and companies have the benefit of, is a fractional CMO could come in right away and see some of the problems and say, this is why this month our numbers are so down, is you didn't have these top of funnel leads that you were nurturing for the last 6 months.
Random acts of marketing.
Yeah.
Certainly love that. Yeah. So it sounds like the structure of the team, as I'm thinking about, as a startup thinking about it, they should have someone in demand gen, or sometimes called growth marketing. They should have product marketing who can do the positioning and the competitive, and then they should have corporate marketing or comms or content. That sort of all falls into that. And I guess that changes over sort of from seed A, B, C. Obviously, you get bigger structures underneath here. In corporate marketing, we have comms and we have all sorts of different functions. But where should they start? Like, you need all those capacities. If I'm at seed stage, I'm not going to have all those three, that power trio up front. Which one do I hire first? And then when I go to A, is that the point when I have all those three? Talk to me a bit about structure of the team, because then the CMO or fractional CMO is over the top of all of that.
My bias would be to pick the revenue marketer first. So the demand gen. And the reason why is that setting up the systems and activating the channels is something that really takes time, and it takes time to pull the numbers together and do the reporting. You won't believe it, but shockingly, still some pretty evolved companies I work with still don't get the reporting right. I mean, they just can't do it effectively, and I'm onto this whole, there's a company that I just love. It's a startup company. They're not a client of mine, but they basically built a dashboard, but it's one like I've never seen in my life. It basically says, here's your pipeline quarter to quarter. Are you green, red, yellow? It's amazing. Wow, and it's because we have all these proprietary MarTech systems that are integrated, but it's still really hard to get one glass pane of data, Yeah. So I think the revenue marketer is the most important because it's the most technical of jobs, and you can simply outsource the content creation for a while because you've got to have something to put into those channels. You can do that for a while until you really understand your voice and like what you're talking about and come up with some ideas like podcasts or video interviews or whatever. I think the next hire after a revenue marketer would be a product marketer. I would be nervous about starting with a product marketer because unfortunately, then you have a website full of product jargon and it's like they forget that they're talking to someone who's never heard of them. And they're like, but let me explain this feature detail to this level. And like, no one even knows what that means. Like, not at all.
Right.
So revenue marketer, they're selling.
And the revenue marketer, just to sort of dive into that, is someone who knows about paid, or is this an email marketer? Is this a field marketing person? Like
they manage all the channels.
All of those, yes. But like, do you tend to lean more towards, hey, I try and get someone who's great at paid acquisition, or I try and get someone who's really good at the field, or does it change by startup?
Again, it depends on what the company's product and how they expect that they're going to win customers, how they've been winning so far. And, a lot of the early stage, it's founder-led sales or there's one salesperson. So I'm working with a startup right now who's got a very specific audience and they know exactly who they're selling to. And they're not even really having to do sales. They just need the people who are going to buy their product to understand what their product does and how it works. That's like super simple. So trade shows are actually really good for them. And paid marketing would be a waste for them because they don't need to advertise. They already know exactly who they're selling to and they're able to get in touch with them. I have another one that feels they're needing to raise awareness of the space they're in. So there's retargeting that would be very effective. So it really depends. Field events can be so powerful, if just getting in front of that buyer, if you do it right. And if you have that kind of buyer who would go out to dinner and be happy to do that or want to see a virtual event. But revenue marketers are usually in charge of all of the channels. So events, paid, email marketing, everything that goes under outreach outside the company and market penetration.
That's great. So you obviously learned a lot. You've got a lot of experience to bring to bear. And you were one of the first marketers at 6th Sense, which for those who don't know is an ABM platform, pretty hot company. Tell me what you learned from that experience.
6th Sense, this is early days. Some of the same founders, some different founders. And actually some people that were started the same day as me still are there. It's a wonderful company. I have not only been an employee, but also a customer of theirs. And now in my current business, we do a lot of my clients use them. So what I learned, I was employee number 11. So it was, we were so focused on proving that this product worked and how it worked. And at the time, this was a time where everybody sort of thought lead scoring was it. Like, you can hand this over to sales if this person has done enough activity to merit to reach 100 points, which we still use. We still use lead scoring because everybody's comfortable with it. And the idea of building predictive engines that predict if an opportunity is highly likely to open, if a potential customer is leaning in, just wasn't even anything anyone understood. So the two things I learned, one was that the analyst relations, it's something that technically happens later in a company's iteration, but it was so important for us. And the reason why is that we were changing how these analysts thought about marketing technology. Back then there were fewer players in it. Number two is that I probably spent 100 hours collectively on the phone with analysts explaining how we were different from lead scoring. In fact, we even canceled a webinar the day before because they published something about lead scoring. We're like, we're not doing this because that's not what we do. So it was a lot of me as the head of marketing, just evangelizing that how the product worked, how we took CRM data, stuff on the dark web, which would be like downloads or, other things, and also marketing automation data and blended them in. It was a bespoke prediction based on your company and your buyers. And they just couldn't wrap their heads around it. So key takeaway was, if you ever find yourself working for a company that has sort of a game-changing, this is a different category, just doing a briefing with analysts, you don't even have to pay them. Just going out and telling them about your product is super important. And in fact, one unfortunate thing about some of these analyst firms is that if Forrester writes about it, then Gartner has to write about it. So you really can play them off each other. But that was one big lesson. The second lesson that I learned from the then CEO, Amanda Kalo, who was one of the founders. Amanda's got a big personality. She was amazing on stage. We saw her speak in front of a crowd of like 400 people. She was super nervous. It was the first time we were just launching, and she just knocked it out of the park. And we put her on stage 40 times during the year because she was selling to marketers, mainly women. And she's such a, empowered person. And so inspirational that she would have a stage full of, groupies after she'd be done. So we learned that like speaking, it's just speaking presentations, pitching her. That was also really worth our time. Again, first year of the company. And I think the third thing was we had some, competitors, and they didn't do what we did. And that was the battle we were fighting with the analysts. And there were a couple of trade shows, and Amanda's, being a big personality, she said, we need to be the titanium sponsor. Well, I'm used to working for a startup where you're like the 10 by 10 booth at Dreamforce, which we also were at one point, but go big or go home. And so if you've got the budgets, which we did that. And we also produced our own conference that year. So, there's a kind of a mix of like, take the risk, put yourself out there, sell as hard as you can, even if your job isn't in sales, and, do big things, because that really will add up. And I think that got them off on the right foot.
That's great.
I think it's very interesting that, you're able to not only have these experiences as a marketing leader, but have them at the companies that are helping define the future of marketing itself. And so you're there and defining what an ABM platform looks like. Then you went to Social Course, now known as First Up, and that's an employee comms platform. So again, another sort of big core part of brand that you learned about. What else did you learn from that experience?
So it was an interesting transition between those two. I actually worked for a European company that was in consumer insights, completely different world. That was a US go-to-market play. I want to mention that even before I get to Social Course, because it's a great PR story, actually. And Morgan, you might remember this, but this was a company based in Finland. There was really nobody in the US. And what they did was cross-device insights, much like Comscore and Nielsen, but they really were the first to say of the panel, and they have a panel of users who agree to have their data tracked in exchange for compensation. They are able to say like, hey, this Amazon shopper was on mobile. Now they're on their desktop, and then they're over here on their iPad. Like, what is that shopping journey? So that data is used by a lot of big companies to understand how they should be marketing and how people use their products. The story is that we had so much anonymous aggregated data that we could tap into in a time when mobile was still like how people use mobile was still a little bit mysterious. And so we created a very content plan that essentially was like chart of the day. So for example, the Oscars, that's something that happens. We were able to say, hey, women, they really only watch the red carpet and then they're off. The men actually watch the awards. So it was kind of like a great, and we did some great design and stuff. So we did this very regularly. And the year before I started working there were something like 18 press hits, mainly about funding and so forth and people joining the company. But because of this chart and how we were so diligent about putting together, and we used data to do this, we started getting inbound calls, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Hey, how do you get this data? We got customers from it. So by the end of the year, we had 686 individual pieces of press, and it wasn't company news. So my point there is I learned a valuable lesson about how you really can use your own data to create a viable content channel. And these are like non-obvious insights or insights that are proprietary to your company. So I'm a huge advocate of that. So Social Chorus, now First Up, when I went to that company, the marketing team was very small. And I would say that is where it really sort of struck me that building foundational marketing and how to build it and who to hire first and what to put in place was so important. I mean, I was starting from the ground up, rehiring different people. One of the big things that happened at First Up, their product is for employee communications. And so it was at the time really a mobile play. CEO was like, hey, we have the day off on Monday. Everybody have a great day. Boom. Message went to all the employees. These are the companies that buy Social Chorus or buy First Up tend to be large, very distributed companies. Well, mobile became a thing that anybody could use. Anybody could send a message through WhatsApp. Anybody could post a social message. And Social Chorus at the time really needed to rethink what they were doing in the world, what their platform was. So I learned a lot about positioning and repositioning something that wasn't completely baked at the time. It was not a platform at the time. We renamed it to a platform. We changed the whole narrative. And we went through a pretty extensive process, researching, talking to customers, talking to prospects, and finding a better way to describe what we were building. And part of that was really naming the problem that we were solving for people, that employees were disconnected, that every worker needed to matter, and they weren't because they weren't being reached. And we also needed to, and this is so trite, but like make the buyer the champion. Okay. Everyone says this, but this buyer was a internal comms buyer. It wasn't even like all of comms. It was like one person who's only responsible for internal comms. They had no budget, they had no power, and they had no team. And so once we got to them, and the fact they had no budget at the time was real challenging, but we identified the business buying committee and said, well, actually, they're one of the closest people to the CEO. They have his ear because he wants to get that message out. Oh, actually, they're the one that pushes messages out from HR. So IT actually would very much like people to comply with security. So they also are talking to IT. So we figured out what were the combinations of people that touched internal comms and how could we sell them individually on a tool like this? And it changed everything about the company. The company went on actually. So when I was there, they had one annoying competitor, Dynamic Signal, that was like toe to toe. The features were the same. Everything was the same. At the time, the CRO was just like, oh God, and I think that through a lot of hard work and this focus on repositioning and just relentless go-to-market, we won. And in fact, the CMO came up to me and said, I don't know what you guys have been doing in marketing, but you're just knocking it out of the park. And we kept hearing that from our competitor. And we're like, so I think that what I learned there was just that player coach, like you said earlier, Ian, it's so important. I mean, I roll my sleeves up and I just get in there with everybody else. I don't need to be the diva and sitting back and directing traffic. I actually don't like that. And, just to kind of round that story out, a lot of those experience collectively is what inspired me to start Trusted CMO, because I thought I actually really like to build things and I really like to show companies how they can be successful and help them scale and say, it's not time for this, but it's time for that. That really gives me a lot of inspiration, makes my job
That's
fun.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is fun. So to summarize those things, so at 6th Sense, the strategy was building a category, defining a category, which you largely did through analysts. You had a CEO who could be the sort of figurehead for their business and sort of really, often the CEO is one of the key assets that a startup had. So you made sure that you pushed her forward as much as possible, give her as much to be the figurehead for the company. And you took some risks on spending some money. And I think good marketing does involve some risks. And, often what kills it is, hey, where have we done this before? Well, if we've done it before, then, it's been done before. And so you can kind of go down to the sort of lowest common denominator there. So analysts, a big spokesperson, and taking a risk, which was the show. Then at the mobile analytics company, you use the data. Like, what is it that we know that nobody else knows? And how did you package that up and use that for the way you communicated? That was largely through PR. And then at Social Chorus, it was about, hey, we have a great proposition, but then the market shifted. And it was about repositioning and getting the messaging, knowing, hey, we now need to message differently and think about a different persona and go after that persona and make them the hero of the story and identify with them and then help them secure the budget to buy your things. So did I get that right in terms of sort of summarizing that?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Good. Well, those are some great strategies I think everyone can sort of repurpose or apply to what they do. I want to go on now to talk about a few sort of trends that you're currently seeing now. Obviously, we're sort of, I would say we're in a recession or certainly in a downturn in startup land. Like, so where are you? And that we talked at the beginning, that sort of cutting budgets, but where are you with your clients? Where are you cutting and where are you investing? Because you can't cut your way to success.
I'm a big fan of being very judicious with paid. I think that paid, I've seen clients who are just throwing, like 25, 30K, and these are smaller companies, a month at paid and really getting crap leads. I mean, they're not paying attention to it. They don't really understand it. And so I actually am an advocate, and I'm not ditching paid agencies per se, but I think it's a bit of a black box, like it's just, it can be for clients that they're kind of like, we need this, but we don't really get it. There's a few individual consultants that I work with that really can kind of help get them where they need to go. So then they feel comfortable talking to an agency and they know what questions to ask. So paid is an area where I would say, cut it down and let's do what's working. Events, I'm a big fan of them, but if I don't think that the team can execute well, then I would say ratchet those down to only the key ones and then maybe rethink how you do field events. The other thing that I would also reduce is, and it depends on, and I hate to say it, cut people, but sometimes you have people at companies that just are not, they were hired back then. They're just not pulling their weight. Like, you don't have to put up with that. You don't need those warm bodies anymore. So can we put them in a different job? Can we change their job? Or is it not going to work out? I'm also personally a big fan of, when I'm hiring, I look for personality and I look for possibilities with people versus a lot of experience. One of the things that I'm a fan of, the trusted CMO, is hiring the sort of Gen Z. And I know they come with some new baggage we're discovering, not just like millennials. They've got their own baggage. They don't communicate as well. They're used to, it's just an Asana. Didn't you read that? I've gotten that comment before, but their agility with technology and you don't have to train them on anything. You say, can you log into this? And they've already got it and they're working on it. And I'm like, well, their brains work much faster than me. And every project I hand to them, as long as the confines are clear, you can get it done quickly. So my point is that I urge companies to sort of, and a lot of my companies, they have very good internal recruiters, but to think a little differently about what is this job role going to take? What kind of person would be best at this? And you don't have to hire for the big, if you're a startup, don't hire from the big companies. It's not going to work generally.
What about brand? Is now a time for cash-strapped startups to invest in brand?
Well, it depends how you define brand. There's a couple of different things that I think are important. One is visual identity is something that is appreciated, whether we realize it or not. We're in an Instagram world. We're in a TikTok visual world. So I think how your website looks and functions, do you use video, all of that, is your brand cohesive? Does it make sense? That is really important. And, that's just something, again, you don't need to have a full-time brand person. You just need to realize it's important and make it easy for customers to navigate your website and understand what you do. We just redid ours and I'm like, oh, so much fresher, just keep up with the times. It's like wearing the old pair of pants versus the new cool one. Brand can also be, how do your customers and prospects interact with you, from your website to your salespeople, to your CEO, and to, the onboarding process. That's all important. And I think there's a level of oversight there where everyone needs to be clear on the values that you as a company have. If you're promising to make things speedy and easy, then your website should work that way. Your sales team shouldn't drag their feed. You should have a pricing page with some actual pricing, or at least a hint at it. There's so many things that go all wrong.
No, absolutely. Having a point about pricing pages, I think having an actual price rather than just contact sales actually increases conversion enormously. So have a pricing page and have prices on it.
Yes.
Sounds radical, really works.
Yeah. And most people don't want to do it, but it's like, hey, at least say what's included and it starts at this price. But pricing is a whole thing. And yes, we do that actually for companies. We get into the pricing and it's complicated work, but it needs to be done.
Absolutely. Okay, great. There's some great advice in there, Alison. Thank you for that. I want to move on to our next section, which we call Smart People, Dumb Questions. And in this section, we ask exactly that. I have a bag, and I'm waving it in front of me, of stupid questions that we've put in here that we like to ask all of our smart guests. So I'm just going to go through these. The first one is, what's the most dangerous thing that you've ever done?
Oh, okay. I guess the question is dangerous to whom, but I'll tell you, it's basically the scariest thing I've ever done. I went to Kauai and I flew in a doorless helicopter. Now, I don't know if you know, this is such a sad thing, but there's been like 3 or 4 helicopter crashes in Kauai. So let's just start there, that I even got in this thing. And there was no door. And I thought, I'm going to sit by the pilot. It'll be fine. No, I was by the door, and we were like 3,000 feet in the air and the helicopters everywhere. And I basically couldn't move and just sat and gripped my friend the entire time and held on to like every point as if that was going to save my life. But anyway, yes, that was the scariest thing and probably dangerous.
Yeah, I'm scared of heights, so that sounds absolutely terrifying to me. What is your weirdest pet peeve, the thing that you don't like the most?
Oh, God, it just proves that I'm sort of an irritable person. I guess go crazy when I walk into a grocery store and there's someone like, I'm looking for a can of tomatoes and someone's like, God, I wonder where the can of tomatoes is. And I wonder where and I'm like, are you asking me a question? Or are you just muttering and hoping I chime in and help? Like there's something about that just irritates me so much. So my usual answer is just to run the other way. Like, I'm like, I'll skip the tomatoes today and I'll go over to the other aisle. So weird. It's like a cranky person thing. I don't know.
Or online shopping. It's like a whole thing. No supermarkets involved.
Yeah, there is that.
Get around
yeah.
that. And the last one on here, what book are you currently reading, or what book would you recommend?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm reading this book right now. It's not the most uplifting book, but it's by a guy called Victor Wolf. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. So it's a philosophical book. It's been around for a long time. This man was in a concentration camp and went through a lot. And then he's a psychologist. So he started to analyze what people became in an environment like that. A friend of mine gave me this book, and I, of course, me being irritable, said, Man's Search for Meaning. I'm not going to read this because it says man. What about Woman's Search for Meaning? I got a big eye roll. So anyway, I said, okay, fine, I'll read it, and I'll let you know if I think it's enlightening at all. But so far, so good.
That's a great book.
It's an excellent book, and it's a tough read, but well.
Well, good. I'll persist.
Thanks for that. Now, our next section is called the Fired Up 5. So, Ian.
Yes, the Fired Up 5 is where we ask 5 quick fire questions, and our guest gives us quick 1 or 2 sentence responses on each. The faster, the better. All right. So what would you do if you weren't in marketing?
I would be a musician full time. I played bass guitar, and I haven't been playing for a while. I was in a band, like an okay-ish band, but I really, really love music. And so I would be playing music all the time.
Nice. Jazz bass or P bass?
Oh, hello. Electric bass, rock.
There we go. What is the best career advice you were ever given?
Oh, I had a boss that once said kind of the 2 things you need to know about marketing are people don't read and they're lazy. And so I don't think there's anything more true than that. Like, that's all you have to know. Websites, content, people don't read and they're lazy. So make it good.
What's the one tool you can't do your job without?
My Slack, actually. I would say my mobile phone, but Slack is cuts the email down to almost nothing.
What hot trend has caught your eye right now?
Well, I don't mean to be generic like everyone else, but I am watching the generative AI trend like everyone else, but I'm looking at it specifically for marketers. I think that we have such hard and busy jobs as marketers. So I actually have a data science intern working for me this summer who happens to be my son. He's graduating from Northeastern, and he is on that remit. He's trying all the tools and writing his reviews and saying how we might be able to use it or our clients can use it. That's something that I'm paying attention to and forming my own opinions.
Okay, I think I know what your answer is going to be to this next question, but AI, overhyped or underused?
I would answer maybe overhyped, but I would say still not ready for prime time. It's bad at math. I mean, we all need math assistance, and it does not do that.
And it lies,
Yeah.
Excellent. Alison, listen, thank you very much for all of your time today. It's been great chatting to you. If people want to reach out to you and get in touch, how can they contact you?
Well, you can go to trustedcmo.com. That's my website. Fill out the form if you like to fill out forms, or you can reach me at Alison, ALISON, at trustedcmo.com.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alison.
Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/fired up freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.